It was the summer of 1980. The hottest summer in Tennessee history. Temperatures hitting 105 degrees. People fainting in the streets. Hospitals overwhelmed. Power grids collapsing under the pressure of millions of air conditioners running at full blast. Across the county, neighbors were paying $400, $500, some even $600 electric bills just to stay cool. But on a small hill outside of Harlan sat one farmhouse that was different. Inside that house, it was 71 degrees. No air conditioner running. No fans humming. No electricity being used at all. Just cool. Naturally. Perfectly. Almost impossibly cool. That farmhouse belonged to old Hank, and what he had done to his roof cost him exactly $5. $5 in materials. One afternoon of work, and his house has never needed an air conditioner since. Not in 1980. Not in 1995. Not today. The AC industry calls what Hank did a threat to their business model. A former HVAC executive who worked for one of the largest cooling companies in America once said in a private meeting, "If every homeowner in America knew this $5 roof trick, our entire industry would collapse in 10 years. That meeting was in 1987. The notes were leaked in 2019. This is the story of old Hank's $5 roof trick, and why they have spent nearly 4 decades making sure you never heard about it. To understand the trick, you need to understand where it came from, because this wasn't something old Hank invented. He discovered it, hidden in plain sight, right above everyone's heads. Quite literally. In 1972, Hank was doing some repair work on an old farmhouse outside of Knoxville. The house belonged to an elderly widow named Mrs. Clara Beaumont. She was 84 years old, and her house, on the hottest day of that summer, was the coolest place Hank had ever stood inside. He asked her about it. She laughed and said, "Honey, my husband built this house in 1921. We never owned an air conditioner. A single day of our lives. Never needed one." Hank looked at her, then looked at her ceiling, then looked back at her, and said, "Mrs. Beaumont, can I go up on your roof?" She said, "Be my guest." What Hank found up there stopped him cold. Mrs. Beaumont's husband had done something unusual when he built that roof in 1921, something that wasn't in any modern building code, something that no contractor in 1972 was doing anymore. He had installed 3 layers of a specific material directly under his roof shingles. A material so simple, so cheap, so widely available, that when Hank realized what it was, he actually laughed out loud. Standing on that rooftop, in the blazing Tennessee sun, he laughed, because the answer was so obvious, so elegant, so completely buried. He climbed back down, sat with Mrs. Beaumont, asked her if her husband had ever explained why he did it. She nodded slowly, said her husband learned it from his own father, who learned it from his father before him, going all the way back to the early 1800s, before electricity, before air conditioning, before any of the modern cooling systems we depend on today, back when people had to survive scorching summers, using nothing but their own knowledge and ingenuity. She walked to an old cedar chest in her bedroom, pulled out a small handwritten notebook, handed it to Hank. On the cover in faded ink were the words, "Building Secrets, Robert Beaumont, 1887. Hank held that notebook like it was made of gold, because in many ways, it was. Robert Beaumont's notebook described a roofing system he called the triple cool layer, a method passed down through generations of Appalachian builders who had figured out something about heat and rooftops that modern construction completely abandoned. Here is what the triple cool layer does and why it works so well. First, you need to understand how your roof is killing you. Right now, on a hot summer day, your roof is absorbing somewhere between 150 and 180 degrees of heat. That heat transfers directly into your attic. Your attic becomes an oven. That oven pushes heat down through your ceiling into your living space. Your air conditioner then has to fight against that constant heat transfer, running almost nonstop, burning electricity, burning your money. Every single day of summer, the AC industry loves this, because the hotter your attic gets, the harder your AC works. The harder it works, the more electricity you use. The more electricity you use, the more everyone profits. Except you. Robert Beaumont figured this out in 1887, and his solution was brilliant in its simplicity. A whitewashed roof reflects up to 90% of solar heat back into the atmosphere, instead of absorbing it into your home. Cost of whitewash materials? Under $2. Layer 2 is an air gap. Beaumont's notebook described a specific way of creating a half-inch air gap between the roof surface and the attic insulation below. This air gap acts as a thermal break. Heat cannot easily cross an air gap. It is the same principle used in double-pane windows, vacuum-sealed thermoses, even spacesuits. Trapped air is one of the best natural insulators on Earth, and creating this gap costs nothing, just a specific way of laying the roofing material. Layer 3 is the one that makes the whole system extraordinary. Dried Spanish moss, or in areas where Spanish moss isn't available, dried hay or straw, a thin layer packed between the air gap and the roof boards. Natural dried plant fiber has an insulation rating that rivals modern synthetic materials, costing hundreds of dollars. Early American builders knew this. They insulated everything with it. Then, synthetic insulation companies came along, made it illegal to sell homes with natural fiber insulation in several states, claiming it was a fire hazard. Funny thing though, independent tests conducted by the University of Georgia in 2003 showed that properly dried, natural fiber insulation actually has a higher fire resistance rating than several common synthetic alternatives. Those tests were published in a small academic journal. The journal lost its primary research funding 6 months later. The tests were never replicated by any major institution. Old Hank read those tests in 2004. He wasn't surprised. The story of how this $5 trick got buried goes deeper than most people would believe. It starts in 1953, the year the modern air conditioning industry truly took hold in America. Before 1953, less than 2% of American homes had central air conditioning. By 1960, that number jumped to 12%. By 1970, nearly 36%. This wasn't just because AC technology improved. It was because of a deliberate and well-documented campaign to change how Americans thought about staying cool. Internal documents from a major AC industry lobbying group, obtained through a 2016 Freedom of Information request, showed a series of meetings held between 1,955 and 1,962. The meetings had one agenda item: how to eliminate Natural cooling alternatives. From American building culture. The documents specifically mentioned 3 targets. Passive roof cooling techniques. Natural ventilation design. And what they called folk insulation methods. All 3 were described as, quote, significant threats to long-term market expansion. By 1965, building codes across 23 states had been quietly updated. New residential construction was now required to include AC unit hookups. Natural cooling methods were either removed from approved building guidelines or buried so deep in optional supplemental sections that no contractor ever read them. A retired HVAC industry lobbyist named Gerald Marsh gave an interview in 2021. Before he passed away, he said, and I am quoting directly, "We didn't make AC mandatory because it was the best solution. We made it mandatory because it was the most profitable one. The old ways worked fine, better in some cases. We just made sure nobody remembered them." That interview was posted on a small independent news site. It got 200 views. The same week, a cat video got 40 million. Old Hank read that interview, called it the least surprising thing he'd read in years. In 1994, a building inspector showed up at Old Hank's property, said a neighbor had complained about the unusual appearance of his roof, the whitewashed surface. The inspector cited Hank for violating a local aesthetic building ordinance. Hank asked to see the ordinance in writing. The inspector handed him a paper. Hank read it, then looked up and said, "This ordinance was passed in 1971. You know what else happened in 1971? The county signed a contract with a regional HVAC supplier to install systems in all new county buildings. You think that's a coincidence?" The inspector had no answer. Hank paid the $50 fine, kept his roof exactly as it was. His house stayed cool every summer after that, without ever paying a single dollar for air conditioning. He calculated once that between 1980 and today, he has saved approximately $67,000 in cooling costs. $67,000 from a $5 investment made in one afternoon in 1980. So, exactly how do you do it? Here is Old Hank's complete $5 roof trick. Step 1. Mix your whitewash solution. Take 1 part calcium hydroxide powder, available at any garden or building store. Cost under $1.50 for enough to cover an average roof. Mix with water until it has the consistency of thin paint. Step 2. Apply the whitewash to your roof surface. A simple garden sprayer works perfectly, or a wide paintbrush. Apply 2 coats. Let each coat dry completely. This alone will reduce your roof surface temperature by 40 to 60 degrees. That single step can reduce your AC usage by 20 to 30% immediately. Step 3. Create your air gap. If you are doing any roof repairs or have access to your attic, place 1/2-inch wooden furring strips along the length of your roof joists before replacing any insulation. This creates the natural thermal break air gap that Robert Beaumont used in 1921. Step 4. Pack dried natural fiber between the furring strips. Dried straw from any farm supply store. Cost under $2 for a bale. This is your natural insulation layer. Together, these 3 layers create a roof system that reflects the majority of solar heat, breaks the thermal transfer with an air gap, and insulates with natural fiber that rivals synthetic materials, costing 10 times more. Total cost, under $5. Total time. One afternoon. Total result. A home that stays naturally cool through even the hottest summers without a single dollar spent on air conditioning. Old Hank has tested this through 44 summers now. It has never failed him once. I asked Old Hank last summer, sitting on his cool porch, while the rest of the county was melting in 98-degree heat, whether he ever felt guilty for knowing something this simple, this effective, this cheap, while millions of Americans sweat through their bills. Every summer, he rocked slowly in his chair, looked out at his whitewashed roof, gleaming in the afternoon sun, and said, "Guilty? No, son. I feel sad. Sad that somewhere between Robert Beaumont's notebook in 1887 and a corporate meeting room in 1955, we decided that simple was worthless. That if something costs $5, it couldn't possibly work as well as something that costs $5,000. That's not progress. That's just good marketing." He picked up his glass of cool water from his $2 filter, took a slow sip, and smiled. That same slow, quiet smile. The smile of a man whose house has been 71 degrees every single summer for 44 years. For $5, Old Hank's vault goes deeper still. Next week, Hank is going to show us the underground room trick, the one the government called illegal. In 2019, a room that stays 55 degrees year-round, with zero electricity, zero cooling systems, and zero cost to maintain. The same design used by Appalachian communities for 300 years, buried by modern building codes, for reasons that will make your blood boil. You already know. You won't want to miss it. Until then, look up at your roof. Really look at it. Because right above your head is either your biggest money leak or your greatest untapped secret. Old Hank knows which one his is. Now, so do you.